Welcome to Tuesday's Tips from Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today's tip is more of a thought process than a tip. And this thought process is all about the order of cutting your fabric. And that order can save some fabric. I do like to cut out all of my fabric before I start sewing. And a lot of times the directions will tell us to cut 2-inch strips, 2.5-inch strips, 3-inch, 4, and so on. Then from there, they tell us to subcut all of these pieces. And that system works great. But there's a thought process that we can add into that cutting. Instead of starting with the smallest cuts, start with your biggest cuts. For example, these were 5-inch strips of fabric, the width of the fabric, and I needed to cut 16 5-inch squares. So I do have those squares cut, but then I had some leftover. With that leftover, we might be able to cut some other pieces. I do have this piece at 2.5 inches, so I might be able to pull in a 2.5-inch cut and recut this piece. My 2.5s are too big, so now I go to the lower size and my 2-inch. So let's just put those together, and I can cut 4 2-inch squares from that piece. So that's saving them from this strip. And that was just from that leftover. The next 2 pieces were 3.5-inch strips, and I needed to cut 2 pieces at 40 inches. So I have my 40 inches. I now have a little leftover. What can I cut with those leftovers? Once again, these strips for this particular pattern happen to be long. But if there's a lot of small ones, I can get these. So let's put those 2 together, and I know I'm going to be able to get more 2-inch squares. So from that piece, I can get 2 more of those 2-inch squares. The next 2 pieces, I needed long pieces, and they're 2.5-inch strips, and they're cut at 24 inches. So I do have my 24-inch pieces, and this is what I have left over. Let's put them together. This is 2.5 inches, but I can cut it smaller to 2 inches. And I'm going to be able to get 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 pieces cut from that 2-inch strip. I needed to cut 2 more strips at 2.5 inches, and I needed 4 pieces to be 9.5 inches. I have those, so I do have a little bit left over, and I'm going to be able to get 2 more squares on that leftover piece. So the only thing remaining that I was not able to make do with these leftover pieces would be these. If I'm lucky, I might have a piece of fabric around that I'm going to be able to subcut into them. But if not, I will be saving those 2 extra long strips of fabric that I needed to cut at that 2 inches. So when you look at your fabric and you start cutting your fabric, look at the cutting directions and start cutting the largest part first. Once you have those pieces cut, then take that leftover and look into the pattern and see if there's something that you can cut out of those pieces. If so, then subtract them off of that other list. Continue going down, always going from the largest to the smallest. If we start cutting the smaller ones first, we won't be able to use those leftover pieces to cut larger. So we need to start with our larger pieces. And you'll be surprised on how much fabric you can save by doing that little thought process. So here's what the cutting looked like without using these scraps as I went along. These are all the pieces that I needed. And this is leftover. By cutting my smaller pieces from my larger pieces, chances are I would have only needed that piece, and chances are I could have found that in my scrap bin. But now I have all of this in the scrap bin. And I would have preferred if that was left onto that bigger piece, because that would have definitely been more usable than these smaller pieces. So next time you go cut a quilt, start with that largest, see what you can use up on those extra pieces that are left over from the cuts, and go on. I think you'll be very surprised on how much fabric you really can save. Thank you for joining me today on So Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. You can subscribe to my newsletter. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, all under So Very Easy. Thanks again for joining me. Bye for now.